Hi, everyone. Welcome to EA Zoom meetings. Today, we want to introduce our new speaker, Michele Kraft, and she's going to speak about Saturn and its relationship to Capricorn and Aquarius and how it all makes sense. Michele?
Hello. Let me share my screen. Okay. Does that look fine? All
Yeah,
right.
you're good.
Okay. How in the heck does Saturn rule Aquarius? Oh, Saturn. Nobody loves him, and yet he gives us so much. Oh, hold on. Okay. But just look at him. Just look at him. Like, oh my God. He's nobody's favorite. And then there's Uranus, who we traditionally think of as ruling Aquarius. Here he is. Oh my goodness. And why bring Saturn into it when we've got Uranus? He's so much more appealing. And here he is. Oh my goodness. Here he is getting castrated by Saturn, which is kind of par for the course today, or um, right in line with the discussion. And I'm disappointed that the Franklin Mint never did a series like this. I like this is Saturn here, like a superhero with a cape, and Uranus is like, I kids these days, because that's his son. Nobody likes Saturn, and we could have a lot less of him usually. Thank you. A lot of us wish that Uranus were named for Prometheus, who gave the humans fire, but that's another whole story. Uranus or Prometheus is so much more relatable because he's the rebel with a cause. And I have to admit, that's where I stood, even after I took classes in Hellenistic astrology, which keeps the old original rulerships. I completely dismissed Saturn as the ruler of Aquarius because it's so easy to think of it as like, the ancient folks didn't know about psychology and they weren't using astrology in the same way. So everything's changed. But that's the amazing thing about astrology. It really works no matter what system you use. And wherever we are in our development or here in the world, our real selves are really trying to grow and evolve. And the way the chart wheel is set up shows that the path to growth runs straight through Saturnville. Our moon and sun describe our basic self-identification, like how we're doing this life and how it feels. But we're here to change and grow, aren't we? As I say, most organisms won't change unless they're forced into by some kind of pain. We need challenges, and we can't just let what we're doing and feeling today run the show, or we'd never get anywhere. And that is why we have Saturn opposing the lights. On the other hand, the pain itself doesn't really teach us anything, like running straight towards the pain is just sparkling masochism. It's our reaction, how we sun and moon think and feel in response, act and feel in response to the pain, that's really the growth mechanism. So then the sun and moon seem like pairs. Wait a minute. But of course, they're not. They're on the same side of the coin, our most direct personal who we are. The Sun and Saturn, Leo opposite Aquarius, and the Moon and Saturn, Cancer and Capricorn. Saturn is the only one that can really stand up to the core of our being. So when we look at these pairs, the other pairs that oppose each other, Mars to Venus, Jupiter to Mercury, they describe us, parts of our internal individual selves, but they're not like really the core of us in the same way that the sun and moon are. And Saturn, while we think of him as being out there and being a jerk, is actually about what goes on inside of us. Saturn makes the struggle personal. Thanks, Saturn. We like to think of Saturn as a bastard that never stops giving us a hard time, and that's kind of true. But really, he is reflecting the natural consequences of our choices back to us. So if nothing happens in response to our creative self-actualization, also known as doing things, we learn helplessness. Or we go way overboard trying to get a response. We want to be seen. We want the dopamine hit of attention that we get from other people appreciating what we can do. And if we get too much of a response for no Saturn effort, that's damaging too. Too much of a feeling of being special, Leo. I'm the best as I am, and I don't need to grow. Either way, without Saturn to counterbalance, to help us build our egoic and emotional muscles, we really don't grow. We don't learn what we're capable of. We don't Saturn Aquarius train our mind, and we don't learn to focus our will. Likewise, if we don't experience our feelings, Cancer Moon, we don't develop emotional regulation. So when kids learn to ignore their feelings so they can be a man or parent their parents, they don't learn a safe emotional regulation system. They shut feelings down and stay stuck in that level of emotional development. Processing feelings alone or cutting ourselves off from our feelings is the ultimate being on your own in childhood. And when that comes before the personality is developed, we get traumatized by it. And after trauma, we feel different from our fellow kids. Saturn's children are on their own, no matter what age they are. And it starts with that famous trauma-infused Capricorn and Aquarius childhoods. So if we're sensitive and fragile because we were never safe, we never learned emotional resiliency, Saturn is there to help. Sometimes he has to pull out all the stops to get people to learn how to manage their feelings instead of stuffing them or being defensive. And even then, there's still a lot of us refuse to address the core issue and grow. We're seeing plenty of examples of that today in the year of our Lord 2026. But this is work that only we can do. Just us and Saturn working that lifetime jigsaw puzzle. This is the key to Saturn, that on your own feeling. We see that in Aquarius all the time, right? So, for comparison, the moon represents our oceanic inner life, the personal frame the soul views their experiences through. We might say it's the self complex in psychological terms. It's the current life's ego structure. The moon also represents the mother and how the soul sees and experiences what mother means. And when we're not nurtured as children, the time that we can learn in an emotionally safe environment from our parents, aha, the sun and moon, to understand and fully internalize our true worth, we have to DIY it later. It absolutely does not happen as a result of other people loving us or telling us how great we are later on in life once we're past that childhood. We have to show our worth to ourselves. It has to come from within. And I if you think about people in abusive relationships who stick around and try to remother their abuser into loving themselves so they can love other people, so their feelings, their desires aren't a threat. It may even look like it works at first, but the real learning has to come from inside. Saturn, as the ruler of Capricorn, shows us where we're going to get pushback in the material world. It's where we need to develop our will, also known as grab a hold of ourselves and do the work that shows us our self-worth. This Saturn specializes in achievements that others can see on the outside, opposite our insides, the moon. This Capricorn school of Saturn has us learning to work with earth, material goods, or power, and the tangible results are the goal. By pursuing what we want, we get to explore the true nature of our desires, what makes us tick. Little Saturn time joke. But resisting our desires because we don't have a solid sense of self-worth, we have to get someone external to approve of us for us to feel okay. And that inflames those desires. It can feel like an infected wound instead of growing new skin or bone, even more than actually going after our desires does. It's so much more painful to say no to our sun and moon that all we can develop is self-loathing. We can never be sure what's real because we are always consulting somebody else's opinion, not judging things based on our lived experience. We're in denial of our basic nature, our autonomy, and that builds fear, and fear shuts off growth. Great. We can't change who we are and what we want to do, our moon and sun, no matter how badly we want other people's approval. And Saturn isn't teaching us to earn somebody else's approval. He wants us to earn our own approval. And once we do that, everything comes so much more easily. The beatings will continue until morale improves is a very Saturn joke. And this pressure and a perfectionist streak pushes Capricorn and Aquarius to independence, where she can think in peace. That can cause rifts, rejection, or being othered by the family on an emotional level. There's some internal pressure to do something, even if we're not sure what it is. Capricorn and Aquarius both have a feeling that we're meant to be doing something specific and important, even if it's only important to us. As we feel around for what that thing is, we learn to conform to the rules to get what we want. And this is where Capricorn can fall off a cliff on Mount Saturn and become a bootlicking toady, thinking she'll get further and faster with treachery and sucking up to authority instead of following a moral code or an honorable code of conduct. Aquarius's downfall can come from going too far, like Frankenstein in creating his monster. Frankenstein wasn't worried about what the establishment, scientists, citizens, his creation, or even the dead thought about what he was doing. Defying them all, he made himself a monster. And interestingly, Mary Shelley's subtitle of Frankenstein is The Modern Prometheus. Saturn shows us, if not in childhood, then at some crossroads in our adult life, that it pays to do the right thing. Capricorn wants to learn the current rules, the physical world structure, and Aquarius, too, has to learn the rules, but Aquarius decides which of those ideas nestled in those rules are worth honoring and which ones really aren't. Conveniently, there's a lot of cross-pollination in our behavior, so it's not always easy to tease out which is which with Saturn and Capricorn versus Aquarius. But it's all coming out of Saturn, or we can see that we can relate it back to Saturn. So we work hard, which is no problem for Capricorn. So we move forward with building the thing we want to build. We learn those rules and we use those rules as a structure to help us grow and advance. The Aquarian part of us might identify the shame the family is inducing to control us, for example, and reject it. The family is breaking the rules of love and see that unfairness very clearly. Either way, we're learning to have faith in ourselves, very often because we don't have any choice with Saturn. We have to have that Saturn backbone in the physical and in the mental worlds. Late bloomer Capricorn eventually achieves success. Their parents might not be proud, and that still hurts. But it doesn't control us because we've developed that Saturn. We feed our moon, ruler of Capricorn's opposite sign, Cancer, and we learn that it's our moon, our insides, not our actual mother, that sustains us. When we listen to our sun, our inner Leo, we learn to be loyal to ourselves, not the decree of our father, because Saturn walks alone. And what about Aquarius? The sun, Leo, wants an audience, and in its best iteration, Leo gives their audience catharsis, that emotional release that comes when a truth is revealed and we resonate with it, or the best characteristics of our tribe are on display. Like when we really enjoy a song, right? That we want that Leo to shine a light on our shared humanity, not just their own performance, their own ego. And Leo can unify us with joy, but we've all seen the way that that can turn a person into a monster. Leo can look at that audience as less than themselves, even as they may come to rely on that same audience for their own self-esteem. And that's the pitfall. And Aquarius counters that with Saturn as an anchor. Aquarius needs to know the specialness of Leo by proving it to themselves, and they prove it by leading themselves and other folks into the unknown. Just as the outer earthbound material world of Capricorn Saturn counterbalances the inner world of the Cancer moon, Aquarius is learning to work with the inner processing world of the mind, of ideas, air, counterbalancing that Leo sun outer world of performance and visibility. If we go back to before 1781, when nobody knew about Uranus, and see what 17th century astrologer William Lilly had to say, well, nobody liked Saturn back then either. Lilly says, in manners and actions, when well dignified, he is profound in imagination. And I wish we could just stop there. But alas, in his acts he is severe, in words reserved, in speaking and giving very spare, in labor patient, in arguing or disputing grave, in obtaining the goods of this life studious and solicitous, and in all manner of actions austere. So in today's language, he's describing an active, imaginative mind that keeps to himself, takes ideas very seriously. Saturn's austere, but I like another word for that, and that's stoic. But stoicism has come to mean putting up with pain. People generally think of it as like just going through with something even though you're in pain. But Stoic ethics center on virtue as the highest good, cultivating emotional self-control, a calm, problem-solving state of mind, and rational judgment to attain lifelong flourishing. At the same time, passions, anxieties, and insecurities are viewed as misguided reactions that ought to be controlled through self-discipline practice. That is totally Saturn. When ill, he is then envious, covetous, jealous, and mistrustful, timorous, sordid, outwardly dissenting, sluggish, suspicious, stubborn, a contemner of women, a close liar, malicious, murmuring, never contented, ever repining. So, in other words, he's a self-pitying, misogynistic jerk. And absolutely women can be misogynists. We may have seen some recently in the news. So, what other characteristics of Saturn that we usually think of as straight Capricorn, and how do they relate to Aquarius? Who stays at work when they could be at home in their home life? Saturn. Capricorn's working late again, and Aquarius can't get their head out of the game even if they are physically at home. Capricorn and Aquarius can't often be bothered to do anything if there's no real payoff. Socializing, for example. Capricorn fraternizes with their work friends and they can be a replacement family. Aquarius never stops working their brains on an issue. They like to socialize with work folks too. Yay, more problem solving. Who is fine on their own at work, at home, in a restaurant, at the movies? Saturn. Capricorn and Aquarius would rather have no company than shallow company. And then there's the loneliness. They can both feel alone, even in a crowded room. Nobody wants to talk about work all the time. And with Aquarius, this is problem solving, and Capricorn too. Saturn doesn't think anything else is worth discussing. Small talk is for the birds. Who can be melancholic because they just don't fit in due to all of the above? Twinsies, Saturn. Who's full of questions and obsessions? This is the connected to the profound imagination part. Saturn, who is always thinking about boundaries and rules? Yet again, Saturn. Capricorn wants to master and define the rules, to use the support of structure to work with the material world, where Aquarius wants to examine the rules while he's learning them so he can object to the ones that should be reformed or be broken into bits and never seen again because they are getting in the way of freedom for no reason. Aquarius doesn't want to blow things up for fun. He wants to blow things up so that they can get better. Capricorn is training herself, her heart to endure discomfort so she can be the establishment. And Aquarius is training their mind to accept some establishment so they can use it as a tool if they're not destroying it altogether. And then there's time. Our very first experience of limitation is when we're born and enter the material world. Now we've got to do things like breathe and cry when we're hungry. We're not just part of the womb anymore, where we have limitations. And then we learn, if we're lucky, that how we feel doesn't change the facts, and that we would be smart not to let our immediate feelings dictate all of our actions. And again, that's learning self-limits. Capricorn learns to balance the material world with feeling world. Both are real and have value, but learning to weigh the options before we act protects us during our lives in the material world. We're learning to value long-term accomplishments over momentary feelings, and we're recognizing the power of deferred gratification. Again, with that fight being an internal process. And for Capricorn, rules are tools. If we work the rules, we can climb the ladder of success, or so we're told. Working within the rules, we can liberate ourselves within the boundaries. We can get over the restriction of rules by accepting them as just another part of the current reality. We can leverage the rules to help us and know what we're getting when we decide that we're going to break them. Capricorn would rather work with a boss who's a stickler for the rules than one who's arbitrary in their enforcement. Status and power are the real currency. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, I think I'm behind on my slides. Okay. Status and power are the real currency. Capricorn will squeeze a nickel until Jefferson shits, but that's just because money buys security, status, and power. And when they spend, it is with restraint. So having money isn't so they can spend it to impress other people. It's about being secure. Money buys freedom and power. They may not outwardly flaunt it, but they know, and it supports their inner status, their inner self value. Aquarius is mastering air by opposing the sun, freeing the mind from imposed limitations and learning to be our own authority. Having mastered the corporal in Capricorn, let's assume, we're free to move on to the ethereal, the mind, and the metaphysical, the way, way out. In Aquarius, we see what has been established in Capricorn and try to consciously improve it, first by removing any unnecessary limitations, any rules that there are, but nobody understands why, rules that are disruptive to the flow. And to a certain extent, both signs are this way, wanting to change, wanting things to change in response to what causes pain. Capricorn applies that to stuff, and Aquarius applies it to their thoughts and ideas. Okay. Impulse control, learning to not act on our impulses, learning that we don't have to make a federal case out of everything we'd like to reform, choosing our battles, and yet the inner rebellions really never stop. I want to do it my way, not your dumb way, until Aquarius realizes that they need to get along to go along. They're going to be working very hard and not getting anywhere. We're learning to harness the compulsive nature of the sun before we're completely ostracized. Maybe our idea is superior, but we won't be able to rub anybody's nose in it. I mean, we won't be able to share the good solution tomorrow if we're fired today. By opposing the sun, Saturn sees the seer and gets how point of view dictates our perception of reality. Aquarius is very conscious of their own thought process. They're aware that other people have their own unique perspective too. The conclusions they may reach might be wrong, but we can't change every mind. Some people can't seem to see that other folks are experiencing life and seeing life through a different window to the world than we are, and Aquarius is not one of those people. Aquarius can look through other people's windows and try to understand where the hell they're coming from, and how that will help us share our ideas with them. Or on the shadow side, how we can use that information to manipulate and dominate them. Aquarius, when successful, has the last laugh. We learn to integrate ourselves into the establishment so that we can change it or learn what we can before we dump that establishment altogether and start our own establishment. When they're ejected from the status quo, they'll figure out their own way to achieve what the status quo is failing to do. Aquarius has an active mind that is always tossing around thoughts around, different from the dreaminess of Pisces, but still kind of dreamy in that 11th house future dreamy. The key to interest is improvement, always improvement. And what are we improving? Our access to freedom, especially the freedom of ideas, but all sorts of freedoms. Aquarius is looking out at the rest of the stars in the sky, not back at the sun. He wants to be free to explore everything that's out there. Then there's a world we need to hold on to it, a word we need to hold on to with both hands these days, and I was surprised to see it come up so much in my research on Aquarius and Saturn. And that word is faith. Both Capricorn and Aquarius are learning to have faith. Capricorn needs to have faith in the wisdom of the past and pursues success that way, comparing the self with what's gone on before. No one can live up to that beautiful vision of the past, though. And bonus, by looking back instead of being here right now, we can filter out any of the ugly truths that we don't like by just idealizing the past. So Capricorn can be very hard on themselves trying to live up to a fictionalized version of the past. and hard on society, trying to force that imperfect past on that perfect vision of the past on the imperfect but more fully evolved present. Thanks, Saturn. Capricorn needs to earn happiness with self-validation, not audience validation, and see the deep spiritual value of doing the right thing, even when they could jump 3 levels in rank by doing the wrong thing. That's what the that's the what goes up must come down of Capricorn is all about. With Aquarius, on the other hand, wants to achieve a better future, the right future in his experience by focusing his mind, his will on making progressive ideas manifest. Aquarius is about ideas more than personal achievements, except when the achievement is seeing his vision in practice. It's about knowing what would make the world a better place and wanting everybody to get out of the way so they can make that happen. That's the core of what we call eccentricity or the coldness that we associate with Aquarius that comes from Saturn. Living in future mode can make a soul impatient with the failings of the present. So Aquarius needs to learn to have faith in the future and the person they are becoming, the sun. No one can live up to the idea of the beautiful future, though, because we can filter that story for ugly consequences or roadblocks that go along with it, too. So Aquarius, too, can be very hard on themselves as their beautiful plan for the future unravels. They, too, can be very critical of society and can fall into pushing half-baked crackpot schemes. Aquarius is learning to trust themselves and their vision, not institutions, the rules, or the past. And to walk that lonely path, we've got to grow our faith in our innermost self, faith in what came before, faith in our hard work that will pay off in the future. We've got to have faith that we can forgive ourselves if we fail, and faith that starting again is just the next step towards what we're after. And this is where I got that old George Michael song stuck in my head. I've got to have faith. So I looked up his chart, and of course, bingo, he's got Saturn in Aquarius opposing his moon in Leo, Sun in the first house, Cancer, opposite the Capricorn seventh. Honestly, you can run, but you can't hide when we're creatively expressing ourselves. It's all based on our lived experience, and that's what resonates in art. And we hear that in his lyrics from that song, Faith. I need time off from that emotion. Saturn opposite the moon, then that push and pull between emotional needs and having boundaries. Time to pick my heart up off the floor. Boundaries are supporting emotional stability. Oh, when love comes down without devotion, Saturn sticking to his sense of established rules and conduct. Well, it takes a strong man, baby, who has mastered his will and his emotions. But I'm showing you the door. Saturn would rather walk alone than be walked on, because I've got to have faith. I've got to have faith. He is learning to have faith. If this was something he had already mastered, he wouldn't be writing songs about it. He would just be taking it for granted. I can really hear a lot of Saturn in all of his songs now, like Freedom, Father Figure. I'm a casual fan of his, no expert, but I can hear those Saturn echoes in everything that I do know about his work. So here's the modern chart, and we can see how Uranus plays a role here in Virgo third house. For George Michael, while he was a talented musician, like exuding sexuality, I don't think of him as being wildly innovative. The biggest innovation for me was being an out gay man when the top 40 world was just getting used to that idea. Chiron, who I think of as Saturn's cousin in Pisces there, The inner anguish that comes through in his work, through that square to Mercury and Venus, communicating love made universally appealing through the 12th house placement and that trine to Neptune. But in a sense, it's his downfall too. It was a prison. He was very concerned about his father, Saturn, finding out that he was gay. And he was worried, an inheritance from his father, I think, about what would happen to his career if his sexual desires became public. Saturn opposite Moon, he has a big concern about propriety. What's going to happen if happen to the flow of other people's money if they see the real me? A lot of shame there. So that was a major Saturn test for him when he was outed, when he got caught soliciting sex with a dude. That was a huge crisis in his life. But the society's views on homosexuality were changing, and he was able to recover. So he passed a really big Saturn test there. And Saturn in the eighth, death and rebirth, forcing him to confront his feelings about himself and his emotional inheritance, his father's disapproval of who he naturally was, and his fear around sexuality. But there's more. His boyfriend at the time of his death at age 53 said George Michael had attempted to commit suicide many times, and he was finally successful on Christmas 2026. His estate, driven by shame, no doubt, denies that it was suicide. From MTV.com, his singing ability had been impaired by a bout of pneumonia he contracted in 2011, and that's when Saturn was in his sixth house, sextile to natal Saturn in the eighth. The illness is reported to have reduced his lung capacity by 20%, and that really decreased his vocal power. A source close to the singer told the Mirror, losing voice capacity for a man like him was like losing his inner self or his soul. Things got so dark and difficult after it hit him, it tipped him over a psychological edge. George would never be the same man again, and more importantly, never be the same singer. He needed drugs and alcohol and anything he could get a hold of to cope with such a severe loss. 12th house Mercury and Venus square that Chiron and Mars. And even with his millions of fans, his self-worth seems to have relied on the emotional currency of other people. Capricorn, seventh house, and eighth house, not an internal sense of being a valid person, even if he couldn't sing as well anymore. So many other avenues were open to him, adapting his style, becoming a producer, and he just could not see that. His self-worth centered on being a performer. Moon in Leo. Part of Saturn's lifelong project on us is learning our place in the world, where we are on our path, and as in cases like George Michael, achieving outer success and thinking you lost what makes you valuable, and along with it, your self-worth. That's a giant honking Saturn lesson. We need to address our inner world's response to Saturn's crisis. Sometimes the clothes do not make the man. For those of us who are old enough to remember him, John McCain was a maverick. That essentially Aquarian quality is what he was known for. So I looked up his chart too, and of course, Saturn in the first house. The quickest of bios here, real quick. He grew up in a military family, became a naval aviator, shot down in the Vietnam War, and held prisoner for 6 years. Moon in the Aquarius 12th house in prison. He endured torture that gave him lifelong disabilities. And at some point, his torturers offered to free him. And I've read that's because he earned their respect somehow. But he refused to leave until all of the POWs were released. He was elected to the House of Representatives, where he earned his maverick reputation breaking with Republicans to follow what he thought was right, such as LGBTQ rights, gun regulations, and campaign finance reform. And when he stuck to the structure of his own moral code, he did well, despite going up against his entire party. But from Wikipedia, after many years of observing John McCain, the New York Times columnist David Brooks wrote in late 2007 that there's nobody in politics remotely like him, talking about his energy, his spirit, and his rebelliousness. He was fearless and didn't mind fighting powerful political forces. His willingness to be open and truthful when talking with reporters. He seemed driven by an ancient sense of honor. Saturn. Brooks doesn't see McCain without political fault, and neither do I. But he says that there have been occasions when McCain compromised his principles for political gain, like when he ran for president and picked Sarah Palin as his running mate. But he was so bad at it, it always backfired. McCain's effort in the years leading up to the 2008 election was trying to make the maverick, free-thinking impulses that first made him a political star somehow compatible with the suck-it-up adherences to the orthodoxies required of a Republican presidential frontrunner, and compares it to squaring the circle. McCain needs to square that circle, and the hell of it is he just can't. No, he really can't. If that doesn't describe Saturn at work, I don't know what does. He's got retrograde Saturn in the first house Pisces. Oof. First off, trying to make structure out of the sea, and depending on your orbs, it's unaspected. And that cranks up the volume on themes of guilt and obligation, self-sacrifice, and that is ruling his north node in the 11th and the moon in the 12th. He had to learn to master himself young, Chiron in the 4th, absent his mother, the moon, in the 12th. His heart is with his fellow prisoners in Vietnam, but also with his attention to LGBTQ rights, gun regulations, and campaign finance reform. These are all about regulating that top-down power and control over his fellow human beings, prisoners of power and ideas. He had to be his own aspirational North Star with that North Node in the Capricorn 11th. And we can see Uranus at work there. Let's see. There. Retrograde, and with the third house, like George Michael, backing up what Saturn's pushing, being true to your inner vision, or else. And by contrast, Elon Musk, I'll do a quick drive-by of him. And just to be clear, he never invented anything in his life except self-pitying excuses. He buys innovative companies with wealth he inherited, Aquarius 8th house, uses them to buy universal appeal, Saturn and Venus in the 12th, Mercury in the first, ruling that Venus in the 12th, as if innovations were his heritage and his personal identity. Like Saturn eating his children, he has no pity as he grinds his workers and the rest of the world right into the dust. Saturn is his downfall, his self-imprisonment in the 12th, ruling his 7th house of relationships and 8th house of inheritance, the Wayback Family. He is a walking advertisement for not addressing your trauma. The internal pressure to live up to his family's wealth and power legacy and to impress other people with Saturn ruling his 7th and 8th. He wants to outdo them. He wants to outdo everyone with his mind. He feels his mind makes him superior to others, with a mutual reception between his third house Virgo moon and his first house Capricorn sun. And if you want to get really scared, you can look up his paternal grandfather for more insights about like the logic behind what he's doing and his beliefs about white supremacy. And it's not just white supremacy, it's white wealthy supremacy. He's constantly ruining things as far as I can see with his inheritance and relationships and investors. And yet there seems to be an inexhaustible supply of both in his life, with Saturn ruling Capricorn institutions from the 12th. Rigid thinking, the need to control, holds him prisoner. And Saturn in the Gemini 12th, but at the same time gave him a universal appeal until it didn't. People like to associate Uranus with his so-called genius. Uranus in the Libra 4th, his inner life, his childhood, is dominated by that erratic force. And yes, more trauma, black and white thinking from that. Imagine trying to learn Libra balance and objectivity when your inner life is so tumultuous, so full of Uranus trauma, starting with your family origin. I guess he's got considerable shame around relationships and where his original inheritance came from. His emotionally abusive, incestuous, pedophile father, who did a Woody Allen and had a child with his stepdaughter. Neptune on the sixth opposing Saturn. He's deluded, believing his service to mankind is to populate it with white children he doesn't even enjoy, with Jupiter tag teaming Neptune from that Scorpio fifth. Scorpio Scorpio ruled by, you can take your pick, Mars in Aquarius, inheritance, linking it back to the 12th house Saturn, or Pluto in the Virgo third, controlling ideas, desire to purge and purify. There's a lot of need to control fun and children, and he's well aware that something is lacking, but he keeps barking up the wrong tree to try and fill that hole. But enough of that guy. For a more fun one, an artist with an attitude that you might not have known was a badass. Mary Cassatt, Impressionist artist, and Saturn in her first house, Aquarius. Born wealthy in Pennsylvania, Cassatt was an excellent student. She learned German and French, art, and music. Unaspected Venus ruling the ninth from her sixth house of work environment. So that was really big. She had all the privilege a young artist could ever dream of, except for the crucial emotional support of her parents, and especially her father. Saturn in Aquarius opposing her moon in the Leo seventh. She was accepted into the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts of Philadelphia at age 15. That is like going to college at age 15. She must have been really impressive, and you can see that intensity on her face. Her parents didn't want her to go because they were afraid of what might happen to her if she discovered the horrors of feminism, and she sure did. It's very unbefitting someone of her social class to get dirty and draw. I believe her mother intervened and allowed her to go to art school. Um, the real driving wheel to me for her is that moon in the Leo seventh, opposite Saturn in the first house, Aquarius. Dad's smoldering disapproval weighed really heavy on her, and that trine to her Mercury, too. I'm sure it had her inwardly second guessing herself, making a perfectionist of the way she expressed herself. It also made showing his ass what she could do a top priority. She is absolutely dedicated to doing the mental work of retrograde Saturn, and that is self-discipline. So she's got that packed Gemini fifth house with the IC, Sun, Mercury, South Node, and Mars. She is like loaded for bear with creativity. Venus in the Cancer sixth, which I will note by Hellenistic standards, is unaspected. So beauty, femininity, the mother, love and tenderness, all of that is really loud inside of her. And as feared by her parents, Cassatt began her lifelong pursuit of equal rights for the sexes when she got into college, Venus ruling the ninth. With all of her talent and drive, she ran up against a brick wall at the Pennsylvania Academy. Male teachers and fellow students, the establishment art world just would not let her in. Women, and I can only imagine 15-year-old girls, were not allowed to work from live models, and that is a really big deal in the art world. Can you imagine being so infantilized? Women, especially of that era, saw more naked bodies than men ever do. And yet, you can't do that in public. Anyway, she decided to teach herself by studying the old masters on her own at the museum. Saturn's school of having to go it alone again. Self-directed college at age 15. That's just amazing. Retrograde Saturn right there with the ascendant in her first house. She's piloted by her strength of will and her faith in herself. She remarked that there was no teaching for her at the academy, so she quit school before receiving a degree. And that's like Aquarius don't need no stinking badges, right? So, again, deciding to go against her father's wishes, unaspected Mars, her drive, was barreling her out of that house of creativity. She moved to Paris in 1866 at the age of 22. Women were not allowed in the French art academies either, so she hired those masters privately. Women were not even allowed to go to cafes unless they were chaperoned. That just kills me. And that cut her off from both the avant garde and the establishment Paris Academy. And that further excluded her and all other competent women painters from the crucial, emotionally supportive social component of the art world. Saturn walks alone. Unaspected Jupiter in and ruling the second house Pisces, she was very aware of her own worth. She returned to the US in 1870 at age 26, and her father tried to control her by cutting off funding for anything but her most basic necessities. Saturn opposite Moon again. Her work wasn't selling, and we could populate entire countries with artists that would have given up at that point, but not her. She somehow got a commission to copy paintings in Europe for the Catholic Church in the States, and that funded her trip back to Europe, where she traveled, painted, and trash talked politics and traditional painting. She didn't want any part of what she was seeing in the establishment. Hello, Aquarius, and refused to flirt with the establishment men to promote her work. And that was also a big ostracizing problem for her. If we look at everything the modern chart tells us, these themes are really emphasized. Chiron in the seventh house, Leo, opposing Eris in the first. Sextile Mars in the Gemini's fifth. She stands on principle. She doesn't mind causing a disruption to set things right, even if it hurts. She was considered outspoken and self-centered in those circles, no surprise. But the big deal to me again is that Moon in the seventh, Leo, opposing Saturn in Aquarius first. She's longing for nurturing friendships, but the need to be true to herself in her own standards, her own beliefs, her own values, her own opinion. Jupiter in the Pisces second reinforced that Saturn lesson to do things on her own terms. Meanwhile, the art world had been losing its mind for several decades with the invention of photography in 1826. And that changed everything because paintings weren't the only images anymore. Rebellious innovators like the Impressionists wanted more out of painting than being as realistic as possible. And they were interested in the real world subjects and the way the light played on them. The Impressionist works today look like really familiar and cozy, just like a Disney. But back then, Impressionism was shocking and subversive. It was like the punk rock of its day. So imagine if you're used to seeing images like this and this. I mean, look at that technical skill there. It's just amazing. And then you see this. You can kind of understand how shocking and outrageous the Impressionists looked at the time. It's so punk rock by comparison. And that Saturn blowing out those outer boundaries of the mind. So not only was Cassatt struggling with her dad, she was also struggling to earn a living, trying to be taken seriously as an artist while developing her own style on the self-guided path of the bleeding edge of art. She was walking that Saturn path and having faith in herself anyway, doing it anyway. But then she finally found her 11th house tribe when she met Edgar Degas, and he invited her to show with the Impressionists. And that was a group of rebels. Establishment art world absolutely spit on them. The Impressionists started hosting their own independent shows because nobody else would show them. A whole clan of artists forming their own establishment, right? Saturn's just going to do it his own way. If the general public went to the Impressionist shows to laugh at the work. Her artwork, Cassatt's artwork, was radical, revolutionary because of the way she painted, but it was the subject matter was radical too. Paintings of women and children have been around forever, but Cassatt showed women and girls as if they were human beings with agency, doing the legitimate work of caretaking or being a real live kid. These women weren't props or ornaments, they were real people. And by contrast, just to give you a perspective, here's how Renoir, who was also an impressionist, painted women like vapid ornaments or pets. And here's Mary, women passing the Bechdel test, watching a play, or are they checking out the sausage case? But back to Mary's chart. Again, this Leo moon in the seventh opposing Saturn in the Aquarius first. And it's retrograde Saturn, so she's directly teaching her to develop that self-will, the self-reliance to revisit what she thinks of as authority in her life and reassign that authority to herself. The Capricorn 12th, her work endures today, but it's not as an innovative, in your face celebration of women as human beings, or for her unique expressive use of color, or for elevating motherhood and the children that come with it to the monumental place in society it deserves, but as universally appealing decorative work. And I am not even sure what she'd make of that. I think it would really piss her off. And one of the reasons I chose to focus on Mary Cassatt, we typically think of Aquarius as being this lightning rod of brilliance. And we go right past Saturn, who's toiling away and onto Uranus. And we can see Uranus active in this chart, and it even hooks up with a sextile to Saturn. And we think of like this electricity and epiphanies with Uranus as a response to trauma, which she sure had. And she did communicate that third house Uranus, but she didn't live on repeatedly breaking the mold. She did what Saturn is really all about, getting in there and doing the work, even when everybody else thinks you are crazy. If we're not in the studio working, 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 we're not going to have a brush in our hands when the lightning descends and boom, we have brilliance. But Saturn's lesson as Aquarius's ruler is learning to use our will, learning to use our value, our learning to value our ideas enough to go against the establishment, the outer structures that were built up in Capricorn. And now that structure is happening in air, in our thoughts. How are we for time? I have another chart
You're
with
good.
Mark Maron. Okay. Mark Maron. Yeah. So I'll start with a brief biography from Wikipedia. Marin grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, an aspiring comedian. He started doing stand-up when he was in college. Then he performed and worked in Los Angeles as a doorman at the Comedy Store. So we can see, oh, sorry. We can see he's working on that Capricorn side directly here. He's building relationships, learning the ropes of his trade. Back to the Wikipedia. He also became a protege of self-destructive scream comedian Sam Kinison and began abusing cocaine and alcohol. Jupiter in the 12th, ruling his 11th house Pisces. He's needing that crutch to socialize. After stints in Boston and San Francisco, Marin relocated in 1993 to New York City, where he became a staple in the nascent alternative comedy scene. And back then, comedy was wasn't about telling jokes anymore. It was starting to turn into something different. It wasn't "Take My Wife, Please" comedy anymore. It was moving more into looping jokes within storytelling. And that's where Saturn in Aquarius comes in. His humor is entirely based in the mind. It's not slapstick, it's not snuggly or innocent, it's not facial expressions or props. Marin's stand-up act is marked by his commitment to self-revelation and cultural analysis. He's particularly known for his relentless on-stage exploration of his own relationships with family, girlfriends, and other stand-up comedians whom he's known and befriended over the years. He began his radio career with the liberal radio network Air America, if I wish they were still around, in 2004. Between 2004 and 2009, Marin had four different shows on Air America radio, and he was fired from every single one. The final show had been contracted for syndication by Air America, but that never happened, I assume, because of the bridges Marin burned with his completely honest commentary. We cannot have that. So Saturn in the Aquarius 10th. Was he oblivious? I don't think so. His humor and interview style show that he sees the person he's talking to. I think that Mars and Scorpio in the 7th, he can't help being forcefully honest, and it blasts him right out of there, out of these relationships. He had crippling professional jealousy and anger issues that really kept him from success. Not learning to work with the rules, Moon in Capricorn, in order to crush the rules. He began sneaking into the Air America studios to record his podcast, What the Fuck with Mark Maron. And that's what he's really known for today. In 2015, Maron starting that podcast, he called it a Hail Mary pass because his life was falling apart. He was unemployed and getting divorced. And Saturn really brings us to our knees if we don't want to learn his lessons. Saturn seems to be asking Mark to heal that anger that was a part of his trademark and that Mars and Scorpio and turn that healing into gold. And I love how he's able to grow into that role and display the tender, intimate side of Scorpio with Venus trine Saturn in the Libra sixth of service. And I'd just like to remind everybody that back in 2009, 16 years ago, people did not drop F-bombs in public like they do today. And I'm really here for it, but back then it was a cultural taboo breaking move to call your show What the Fuck. He does love to freak the mundanes, though. Being controversial is one of his biggest trademarks. Saturn breaking the outer boundaries in the Aquarius 10th. So that show, which he later moved to What the Fuck with Mark Maron, he moved to Los Angeles and began recording his podcast in his garage at home, which was nicknamed the Cat Ranch, which is funny because look, that Leo in the fourth house. So on the nose, he proved to be an intuitive, empathetic interviewer whose sincerity and intensity led guests such as Robin Williams to willingly shed layers of privacy. That show was added to the National Recording Registry of the Library of Congress in 2022. He interviewed just tons of celebrities, including Barack Obama, Paul McCartney, Jane Goodall, Spike Lee, Chris Rock, Lorne Michaels, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Brad Pitt, and just on and on, it's hundreds. The show has been noted for its influence on other long form interview podcasts that emerged after its debut. He ended that podcast in 2025, but it opened doors he'll walk through for the rest of his life. His 2023 special, From Bleak to Dark, and that title is totally Saturn humor with a twinge of Scorpio in there. He's got Saturn in Aquarius in the 10th, ruling the 10th, and his ninth house Capricorn. Notice how he's this angry rebel, but he managed to completely draw in the establishment. So much so that he's in the Library of Congress. It's just hard to believe that's where he ended up. So we can see that he got that third house communication piece really licked, and it's in his guts there at the IC. And in this life, he's here to put that to use for society by publishing, getting what he knows out there, and what he learns through relationship out there too. In the Hellenistic view, he's got an unaspected sun in the sixth, ruling his fourth house Leo. He's really just bursting at the seams to be seen. And he's learning to balance the demands of his sun with managing himself in the workplace. He wants to be a part of the establishment, Moon, MC, South Node in the Capricorn ninth house. He had one he had a one-sided rivalry with Jon Stewart, who he admitted was fully fueled by his own insecurity, provided by his Saturn opposing the fourth, his traumatic childhood. He added that John never did anything to me and that he was just jealous of Stewart and the career he had built. Hello, Scorpio 7th. When I was coming up, he was this smart, cute Jewish guy, Marin said, adding that Stewart was a disciplined careerist who understood how to harness his talent and then capitalize it on his own terms. However, in his early career days, Marin says, I never had any control over my talent. I never knew its limitations or what it was. I just I was just all in and demanding a place in the world of comedy. He had to learn how to direct his will, that Saturn ruling his 10th. He says, for some reason, I saw him, Jon Stewart. If I could only have my shit together, I could be more like that guy, which wasn't true because I was out of my mind and I was definitely gunning for something else. Marin admitted that he didn't get into comedy to be an entertainer or to have a job as a talk show host or anything, but he wanted to hold space and speak my mind. That's So, Aquarius, Moon in the ninth, Capricorn ruling his IC, and Cancer in the third house. He added that I loved comedy, so I thought I can do comedy. I think I had a big belief that I will eventually be who I am and always was. South Node in the Capricorn ninth. But it was not, but it wasn't whole until fairly recently, he said. So John just really represented that, and I was annoying to him. Faith in himself and his vision, faith in the value of his voice. So he had to learn how to cultivate that, even as he was like inwardly very sure of himself. He had to learn how to harness that will. And that Jupiter in the 12th squares the nodes in Cancer and Capricorn with that South node as the resolution node. He's had to go back and relearn how to integrate his moon in the Capricorn ninth with that South node and midheaven and learn how to use his self discipline to build something solid in the material world while coming back to advance humanity in the world of ideas. Aquarius, 10th house. And here he is, this bristly guy who curses and is mad at everything, but he's emotionally secure in himself, almost using his vulnerability as a weapon or a lever to help other folks open up, like in his podcast. Venus in the Libra 6th house, backed up by Mars on the descendant and all of that creative energy in the 5th house. It seems to me that he's speaking to all the men of this Virgo generation, Pluto generation, who lacked involved fathers, who were told to be a man. His own dad was crap. He was a bipolar narcissist surgeon. Sun in Libra, distant mom. His mom was very distant. She was a functioning anorexic, he says. That's Moon in Capricorn, like so many other parents of the Pluto generation. They were just not there for him. Being a man meant being callous back then, and he's subverting that by showing this, yeah, gruff exterior. But he has learned but he has learned this emotional understanding somehow. He's got Saturn in Aquarius 10th conjunct the North Node. Wait a minute, that's not right. Saturn in Aquarius, he's got that awareness of purpose, full of his own power with a special destiny that we were talking about earlier. He had to learn to get along with the social sphere to stop being blocked by his own big mouth. His willful Scorpio power will be blocked until it's humiliated into adjustment to fit that social sphere, getting fired from show after show until he turned inward to his Leo, ruled by the sun in Libra, 6th house of work and service. Yeah. So, yeah, yeah. So that's Mark Maron. The Jeffrey Wolf Green glossary says Aquarius is about what the system needs from me and learning to direct our will to express our Leo, in my opinion. Aquarius's Saturn asks us to direct our will and have faith too, but this time it's for internally visible work, the divine discotheque, the divine discontentment that we experience until we fill that role. We're focusing the will to achieve freedom of the mind. We're learning that other people's opinions of us are none of our business. We're learning to disregard all the people who think that we're upside down like the hanged man. We're learning to have faith in our inner self, the singularity, really alone and yet connected to the whole, just as Leo is. Saturn is teaching us to stop letting shame dictate our actions. An Aquarius innovation, like that spark of brilliance that seems to come out of nowhere, does not come out of nowhere. It starts with Saturn handing out some specific kind of hardship that the soul will spend the rest of their life coming to terms with through Aquarius, the mind, and Capricorn, the physical world. I may know the answer to everything, Aquarius, but nobody's going to believe me if I don't have a body of work to show that I know what I'm talking about. And even then, it's often not enough. Saturn wants us to prove ourselves to ourselves first before we're able to convince other people. In the parable of the sower, Jesus talks about this. If we're not prepared, if we don't do the front end work, our seeds, our ideas aren't going to land on fertile ground. Showing up to work creatively on schedule, rain or shine, crabby or fine, angry or sublime, is both earth and air Saturn. We have to trust our mind with our commitment to our work and the ideas behind it and our ability to do that work. Often, genius is genius because it breaks convention and it breaks the rules. And the rules themselves are Saturn, so it is the breaking of them not out of ignorance or lack of skill, but because we can see the Aquarius Saturn possibilities of freeing our minds with the rules. Because uninformed rule breaking is just hot buttered chaos. We don't want to rob our Leo sun of the glory it can achieve, so we have to invest in our Aquarius Saturn. Without Aquarius Saturn faith in ourselves, how can we convince anyone else to trust us in our ideas? There's nothing more frustrating to Saturn than to know that we're right, but nobody believes us. And how do you get consensus without compromising your values? That's the work of Aquarius. And if Aquarius can't convince, they will show by their own example. And that's what usually happens and what makes them look like eccentric geniuses. Evolutionary astrology teaches that a key component of Aquarius, Uranus, 11th house is that experience of trauma. And I completely agree. And I would add, so is Capricorn, Saturn, 10th house. Learning from trauma is Saturn's entire bag. Cruel or absent parents, bullying, racism, incarceration, the memory and the scars that can gang up on us like an internal firing squad that distributes shame when we have an idea, not curiosity or encouragement. That's where we need to find the assurance of some kind of sun, some kind of hope. And that's very lack of the sun that allows Saturn to work his dark magic. We learn to find that the sun and moon are not in other people, but in ourselves. And that is that.
Excellent, Michelle.
Thank you.
I like seeing the two sides of the coin for Saturn.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes more sense, I think, comparing and contrasting how different it is in air and in earth.
Right.
Makes more
And
sense that
also
way.
kind of like feminine and masculine
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
expression of the same energy.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of meld.
yeah,
They meld with Saturn.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so. I appreciate this opportunity.
And we
And we look
appreciate
forward to
you.
having you again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I would
Absolutely.
love to do that.